Dr. Yelena Volkov heard voices speaking Russian from 12,262 meters underground and knew the Kola Superdeep Borehole had never been sealed. The official record said the project was abandoned in 1994, the borehole capped with concrete, the site classified and forgotten. But when Yelena lowered her acoustic monitoring equipment into the shaft, she detected not just geological activity, but human conversation. Dozens of voices speaking in overlapping decades of Russian dialects, calling for help, describing how they'd fallen through the bottom of the world during drilling projects that spanned centuries. The voices were coming from a space that shouldn't exist, a vast underground cavity far below the borehole's official depth, filled with people who had fallen through similar holes drilled by every civilization that ever tried to reach the center of the earth. Babylonians who dug too deep for water, Romans who excavated too far for gold, Soviet engineers who drilled too deep for science. All of them had broken through the fragile boundary at the bottom of the world and fallen into the same eternal darkness. And as Yelena listened to their voices, she felt the ground beneath the drilling platform begin to shift. The concrete cap was failing, the borehole was reopening, and far below, the voices were calling her name. Dr. Yelena Volkov had come to the Kola Peninsula to investigate reports of seismic anomalies near the abandoned borehole site. The Russian Academy of Sciences had received complaints from local residents about underground sounds, structural vibrations, and equipment malfunctions in the area around the world's deepest artificial point. Official explanations blamed the phenomena on post-drilling geological adjustment, natural settling of rock formations disturbed by the Soviet Union's ambitious attempt to drill through the Earth's crust. But Yelena's preliminary surveys suggested something more complex was occurring beneath the Kola site. Her seismic readings showed acoustic signatures consistent with large underground spaces, far larger than the narrow borehole that had been drilled between 1970 and 1994. Something had created vast cavities deep beneath the drilling site, cavities that shouldn't exist according to geological models of the region. Yelena had expected to find evidence of unusual rock formations or unexpected mineral deposits. She had not expected to find a conversation. The voices from 12,262 meters down were speaking in Russian, but not modern Russian. The dialects and vocabulary patterns suggested speakers from different historical periods, some from the Soviet era, others from Tsarist times, a few using linguistic constructions that predated the Romanov dynasty. More disturbing, the voices seemed to be responding to each other in real time, conducting conversations across centuries of linguistic evolution. Ancient boyars debated engineering techniques with Soviet geologists. Medieval miners compared their excavation methods to modern drilling technology. All of them spoke with the casual familiarity of people who had been working together for decades. Yelena checked her equipment repeatedly, certain that she was experiencing some form of acoustic interference or equipment malfunction. But every analysis confirmed the same impossible conclusion. She was listening to human voices from a depth of over 12 kilometers, speaking from a space that contained people from multiple historical periods. The technical impossibility of the situation was overwhelming. The Kola borehole was barely 23 centimeters wide, too narrow for human passage. The temperature at maximum depth exceeded 180 degrees Celsius, too hot for human survival. The pressure at that depth would crush any human body within seconds. Yet the voices continued their conversation, discussing construction projects, resource allocation, and work schedules, with the matter-of-fact tone of people engaged in routine labor. They spoke about the great work, about building downward, about preparing the foundations for those who would come after. As Yelena listened to the underground conversations, she began to detect patterns that suggested the speakers weren't random individuals who had somehow fallen into the borehole. They were organized. They had specific roles and responsibilities. They were working together on some massive construction project deep beneath the Earth's surface, and they seemed to know about her. "Dr. Volkov," came a voice speaking modern Russian with a slight Ukrainian accent. "We've been expecting you. Your seismic surveys triggered our detection systems 3 days ago. We're ready to begin the integration process." Yelena yanked the headphones off and stepped away from her monitoring equipment. The voice had spoken her name, had addressed her directly, had suggested that her presence at the Kola site was anticipated. She tried to convince herself that the voice was a hallucination brought on by stress, isolation, and the psychological pressure of working at one of the most remote research sites in Russia. But when she put the headphones back on, the underground conversation had stopped. The cavities beneath the borehole had fallen silent, as if the speakers were waiting for her response. Yelena activated her transmission equipment and spoke into the microphone connected to her underground sensors. "This is Dr. Yelena Volkov, conducting geological research at the Kola site. Who am I speaking with?" The response came immediately. "This is Dr. Mikhail Petrov, former director of the Kola Superdeep Borehole project. I fell through the bottom of the world on August 15th, 1994, the day we attempted our final drill to 15,000 meters. I've been working down here for 30 years, along with everyone else who ever drilled too deep." Yelena felt her scientific worldview crumbling around her. Dr. Petrov died in 1994. The project records show he suffered a heart attack during the final drilling attempt. The project records show what needed to be shown to prevent future drilling attempts. But I didn't die, Dr. Volkov. None of us died. We fell through. And now we're part of the construction crew for the greatest engineering project in human history. What construction project? The underground. The vast city being built beneath the Earth's crust by everyone who ever dug too deep, drilled too far, excavated too much. Every civilization that developed deep drilling technology eventually breaks through the boundary layer and joins the permanent construction crew. Yelena stared at her monitoring equipment, trying to process what she was hearing. That's impossible. The geological structure doesn't support large underground spaces at that depth. The geological structure you understand applies to the surface world, Dr. Volkov. The underground operates according to different physical laws. Space expands to accommodate need. Time moves differently. Gravity behaves in ways that allow massive construction projects to be sustainable indefinitely. The voice of Dr. Petrov continued with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused colleague. We have Romans who fell through during aqueduct construction, Egyptians who dropped through while excavating pyramid foundations, Chinese engineers who penetrated the boundary layer during well-digging projects, Soviet miners who broke through during deep shaft construction. All of us working together on the same project. What project? What are you building down there? Infrastructure for the surface world, Dr. Volkov. Every civilization that falls through contributes their knowledge to the underground's construction capacity. We build the support systems that keep the surface world stable. Seismic dampening networks, thermal regulation systems, gravitational stabilization matrices. The surface world exists because the underground maintains it. Yelena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic wind blowing across the Kola Peninsula. Are you saying that underground construction is necessary for surface stability? We're saying that surface civilizations are temporary phases in a larger development cycle. Every culture eventually develops the technology to drill deep enough to fall through. When they do, they join the permanent underground civilization and begin the real work of planetary engineering. And if a civilization refuses to drill deep enough, if they avoid breaking through, Dr. Petrov's voice carried a note of sadness when he replied, then they stagnate. They remain surface-bound. Eventually, they exhaust their shallow resources and collapse. Only civilizations that break through to the underground achieve true sustainability. Yelena realized that she was being presented with a choice that wasn't really a choice. According to the voices from the underground, her civilization was facing the same decision that every advanced culture had confronted: drill deep enough to fall through and join the underground construction project, or remain on the surface and eventually face extinction through resource depletion. Dr. Volkov, came another voice, this one speaking with the formal diction of early Soviet technical literature. We should mention that your current research has already initiated the breakthrough process. Your seismic surveys have destabilized the boundary layer above our construction site. The Kola borehole is going to reopen within the next 48 hours. Yelena looked at the concrete cap covering the borehole entrance and saw hairline cracks spreading across its surface. The cap was failing. The shaft that had been sealed for 30 years was beginning to open again. When the borehole reopens, the boundary layer will collapse, Dr. Petrov's voice continued. You'll have approximately 6 hours to decide whether to evacuate the area or join us in the underground. If you evacuate, the breakthrough will be classified as a geological accident and the site will be sealed again. Your civilization will lose its opportunity to join the underground for another 50 to 100 years. And if I don't evacuate, then you become the advance agent for your civilization's integration into the underground. You help us establish contact with Russian surface authorities. You facilitate the controlled breakdown of the boundary layer that allows voluntary passage between surface and underground. Yelena stared at the failing concrete cap, watching cracks spread in patterns that suggested the collapse was accelerating. Whatever was happening beneath the Kola site, it was reaching a critical phase. Soon, she would have to decide whether to flee the area or descend into the borehole to join the voices that claimed to represent every civilization that had ever dug too deep. But as she considered her options, Yelena realized that the choice had been made for her 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union first began drilling toward the center of the Earth. The Kola Superdeep Borehole hadn't been abandoned because of technical difficulties or budget constraints. It had been abandoned because Dr. Petrov and his team had successfully broken through to the underground, and the Soviet government had chosen to cover up their civilization's first contact with the deepest layers of human development. Now, the underground was ready to make contact again, and Dr. Yelena Volkov was their chosen representative for the next phase of human evolution. The concrete cap shattered at exactly 3:47 p.m., revealing the black mouth of the deepest hole ever drilled by human hands. From its depths, voices called in dozens of languages, welcoming Earth's newest civilization to join the eternal construction project that maintained the stability of the world above. Yelena had come to the Kola Peninsula to study seismic anomalies. Instead, she had discovered that humanity's next evolutionary step was waiting 12 kilometers beneath her feet. The underground was ready for new workers, and the surface world was ready to discover what lay beyond the bottom of the world. Yelena spent her first night above the reopened borehole, listening to the most extraordinary engineering briefing in human history. The voices from the underground provided detailed technical specifications for construction projects that spanned millennia, describing infrastructure systems that maintained the stability of the surface world through applications of physics that wouldn't be discovered by surface science for centuries. Dr. Petrov's voice served as her primary guide to the underground's organizational structure. We operate in accordance with what you might call deep physics, the natural laws that govern matter and energy behavior at extreme depths. The pressure and temperature conditions down here don't destroy human consciousness. They transform it. We become capable of perceiving and manipulating geological forces directly. How is that possible? Yelena asked, still struggling to accept the reality of her situation. Consider the brain as an electromagnetic field generator, replied another voice, this one speaking Russian with archaic grammatical structures that suggested a speaker from several centuries past. At surface pressures, the field operates within narrow parameters. At deep pressures, the field expands exponentially. Consciousness becomes geological in scale. A third voice, speaking with the precision of Soviet technical documentation, added, Dr. Volkov, your monitoring equipment has been detecting our construction activities for the past 3 days. We've been building seismic stabilization networks beneath northern Russia. Without our work, the Siberian plateau would experience catastrophic earthquakes within the next decade. Yelena checked her seismic data from the previous week and found patterns that supported the underground's claims. The readings showed evidence of massive construction activity deep beneath the Earth's surface, construction that appeared to be strategically placed to prevent tectonic instability across the entire Russian landmass. You're saying that underground construction prevents surface earthquakes? We're saying that surface civilizations exist in a state of geological dependency, Dr. Petrov explained. The deeper you dig, the more you discover that surface stability requires active maintenance from below. Every civilization that develops deep drilling technology faces the same realization. Join the underground and help maintain planetary stability, or remain on the surface and watch your world gradually become uninhabitable. Yelena studied her equipment readings, cross-referencing seismic data with geological surveys from across Russia. The pattern was unmistakable. Areas with the lowest earthquake activity corresponded exactly to locations where her sensors detected underground construction projects. How many civilizations are working down there? We've integrated 847 surface cultures over the past 12,000 years, came a voice speaking accented Russian that suggested a speaker of Asian linguistic background. Chinese dynasties, Mesopotamian city-states, Egyptian kingdoms, Greek republics, Roman empires, medieval European nations, modern industrial powers, all of them discovered the same truth about deep drilling, which is that the surface world is a temporary phase in planetary development. True civilization exists in the underground, where consciousness operates at geological scales and construction projects can be sustained indefinitely. Yelena felt the philosophical implications of the underground's existence settling over her like a weight. If the voices were telling the truth, then human civilization, as she understood it, was essentially a preparatory phase, a testing ground where cultures developed the technology necessary to join the permanent underground society. Dr. Volkov. Dr. Petrov's voice carried a note of urgency. We need to discuss the integration timeline. Your civilization has reached the threshold depth capacity. Russian drilling technology is now sophisticated enough to break through the boundary layer at multiple locations. Within the next 5 years, Russian engineers will independently discover the underground through deep drilling projects in Siberia, the Urals, and the Arctic regions. That means your government will face the same choice the Soviet government faced in 1994. Acknowledge the underground's existence and begin controlled integration, or classify the discovery and delay integration for another generation. Yelena realized that her position at the reopened Kola borehole made her the advanced scout for a civilization-level decision that would determine Russia's relationship with the underground for decades to come. What happened when the Soviet government chose to delay integration? The Kola project was classified. The borehole was sealed, and the underground continued its construction work without Soviet participation. But the delay cost your civilization 30 years of potential development. The seismic stabilization networks we built during that period were less efficient than they could have been with Soviet engineering contribution. And if the current Russian government chooses immediate integration, then we begin the controlled breakdown of boundary layers across Russian territory. Selected drilling sites become access points to the underground. Russian engineers begin training in deep physics and geological scale construction techniques. Your civilization begins the transition from surface-dependent to underground integrated. Yelena looked at her communication equipment, knowing that she had the capacity to contact Russian authorities and report her discoveries. But she also knew that the nature of her report would determine her civilization's response to the underground's existence. She could describe the situation as a geological anomaly requiring further study, which would likely result in the site being sealed again and the integration opportunity delayed for another generation. Or she could describe it as a contact situation requiring immediate high-level government response, which would trigger the controlled integration process the underground was offering. Dr. Petrov, I need to ask you something honestly. If Russian civilization chooses not to integrate with the underground, what happens to Russia's long-term stability? The response came not from Dr. Petrov, but from a chorus of voices speaking in unison, the collective response of 847 civilizations that had faced the same choice. Surface civilizations that refuse integration eventually exhaust their accessible resources and face ecological collapse. The underground provides access to planetary-scale resource networks and construction capabilities that make sustainable civilization possible. Without integration, surface cultures typically last between 500 and 2,000 years before resource depletion forces societal breakdown. And with integration, unlimited sustainability, construction projects that can maintain surface stability indefinitely, access to resource networks that span the entire planetary interior, consciousness that operates at geological timescales. Yelena felt the weight of her civilization's future settling on her shoulders. The choice she made about how to report the underground's existence would determine whether Russian culture joined the permanent planetary civilization or remained on the surface to face eventual resource exhaustion and collapse. But as she prepared to make her decision, Yelena realized that the underground had already made the choice for her. Her seismic surveys had destabilized the boundary layer. The borehole was open. The integration process had already begun. The only question was whether it would proceed as a controlled integration with government cooperation, or as an uncontrolled breakthrough that would force emergency classification and cover-up. Dr. Yelena Volkov, geologist and unwitting ambassador to the underground, activated her satellite communication equipment and began composing the most important message in Russian history. The surface world was about to discover what lay beneath the bottom of the world, and the underground was ready to welcome its newest civilization to the permanent construction project that maintained the stability of the Earth itself. Yelena's communication with Moscow lasted 14 hours and resulted in the most classified emergency meeting in Russian government history. Within 18 hours of her initial report, a joint task force of geologists, engineers, military officials, and intelligence specialists had been assembled and was en route to the Kola Peninsula via military transport. But the underground had been monitoring Russian communication networks, and they were ready for official contact. When the government team arrived at the Kola site, they found Yelena standing next to the reopened borehole with a collection of artifacts that shouldn't have existed. Tools and equipment from historical periods, spanning thousands of years, all of them modified for use in extreme deep earth conditions. Roman mining implements designed to function at crushing pressures. Chinese excavation tools adapted for temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Celsius. Soviet drilling equipment modified with materials and techniques that weren't part of the original design specifications. All of the artifacts had been sent up from the underground during the night, carried to the surface by elevator systems that the underground had constructed within the original borehole structure. Dr. Alexei Kozlov, director of the Russian Academy of Sciences Geology Division, examined the artifacts with growing amazement. Dr. Volkov, these tools show evidence of metallurgical techniques that haven't been invented yet. Some of these materials don't exist in our periodic table. They were developed by underground civilizations using deep physics, Yelena explained. The pressure and temperature conditions down there allow matter manipulation at the atomic level. The underground has access to materials science that won't be discovered by surface research for centuries. General Petrov, no relation to the Dr. Petrov speaking from the underground, studied the modified Soviet equipment. These drill bits have been enhanced with cutting surfaces that shouldn't be possible with known materials technology. If these modifications work as they appear to, they would revolutionize deep drilling across all applications. The underground wants to share the technology, Yelena said, but sharing requires integration. Russia has to commit to the controlled boundary layer breakdown process. Dr. Kozlov activated his communication equipment and spoke directly into the borehole. This is Dr. Alexei Kozlov representing the Russian Federation government. We're prepared to begin formal negotiations regarding integration with the underground. The response came immediately, spoken in modern Russian by Dr. Petrov. Dr. Kozlov, we've been expecting this conversation for 30 years. The Soviet Union chose to delay integration in 1994. The Russian Federation now has the opportunity to make a different choice. What exactly are you proposing? Controlled breakdown of the boundary layer at 12 selected sites across Russian territory. Each site becomes a permanent access point between surface and underground. Russian engineers begin training programs in deep physics and geological scale construction. Russian civilization begins gradual integration with the permanent planetary civilization. General Petrov leaned toward the communication equipment. What are the security implications of this integration process? There are no security implications in the traditional sense, came the response from the underground. The underground doesn't operate according to surface concepts of territorial control or resource competition. We operate according to geological scale cooperation focused on planetary maintenance. But Russia would be sharing technology and resources with 846 other civilizations. Russia would be gaining access to technology and resources developed by 846 other civilizations. The integration is mutually beneficial on a scale that surface economics can't adequately measure. Dr. Kozlov studied the artifact collection, particularly focusing on the modified Soviet equipment. Dr. Petrov, can you provide us with specific examples of what Russian integration would contribute to underground operations? Russian metallurgy and engineering precision would significantly enhance our construction capabilities in the Arctic deep networks. Russian mathematics would improve our geological modeling systems. Russian space technology would allow us to extend underground operations to lunar and planetary scales. The implications of that statement hit the government team simultaneously. General Petrov spoke first. Are you saying the underground operates beyond Earth? We're saying that every planet with sufficiently advanced civilizations eventually develops underground networks. Earth's underground has been in communication with underground networks on 17 other worlds. Integration with Earth's underground provides access to interplanetary civilization at the geological scale. Yelena watched the government officials absorb the revelation that the underground represented not just a terrestrial civilization, but a component of an interplanetary network of geological scale societies. Dr. Kozlov spoke carefully. Dr. Petrov, we need to understand the scope of what you're proposing. Are you describing integration with a planetary civilization or with something larger? We're describing integration with the next phase of conscious evolution. Surface civilizations develop technology until they're capable of deep drilling. Deep drilling leads to underground integration. Underground integration leads to geological scale consciousness. Geological scale consciousness leads to planetary engineering capabilities. Planetary engineering capabilities lead to interplanetary civilization. And the alternative? Surface civilizations that refuse integration remain bound by surface resource limitations and eventually face extinction through ecological collapse or resource depletion. General Petrov asked the question that everyone was thinking. How do we know this isn't some form of invasion or conquest disguised as integration? The response came not from Dr. Petrov, but from a new voice speaking Russian with an accent that suggested centuries of linguistic evolution. General, this is Ivan Volinsky, boyar of Novgorod, integrated with the underground in 1547 during well-digging operations. I have been working in the underground for 477 years. The integration process doesn't eliminate surface identity. It expands it to geological scales. I remain Russian, I remain human, but I also operate as part of a consciousness that spans continents and communicates with 17 other worlds. You've been conscious for 477 years. Consciousness at geological scales operates according to different temporal frameworks. What you experience as years, we experience as moments in longer cycles of planetary development. Integration doesn't mean losing your humanity. It means discovering what humanity becomes when it operates at planetary scales. Yelena realized that the government team was facing a decision that would determine not just Russia's future, but humanity's understanding of its own potential for development. The underground was offering integration with a form of civilization that operated on scales beyond surface comprehension. Dr. Kozlov made the decision that would define Russian civilization for centuries. Dr. Petrov, the Russian Federation is prepared to begin the controlled integration process. We want to proceed with boundary layer breakdown at the selected sites. Excellent, Dr. Kozlov. Integration will begin with the establishment of underground access points at the 12 designated locations. Russian engineers will begin deep physics training programs. Surface underground coordination protocols will be implemented gradually over a 5-year timeline. And Dr. Volkov will serve as the primary liaison during the integration process. Her understanding of both surface and underground operational frameworks makes her the optimal coordinator for the transition. Yelena felt the weight of her new role settling over her. She was about to become the primary interface between surface Russian civilization and a geological scale society that maintained planetary stability through construction projects spanning millennia. But as the government team began planning for humanity's first controlled integration with the underground, Yelena realized that this was how civilization was supposed to develop. Every sufficiently advanced culture eventually discovered that surface existence was a preparatory phase for something larger. The underground wasn't an alternative to human civilization. It was what human civilization became when it grew beyond surface limitations. Dr. Yelena Volkov, surface geologist turned underground liaison, stood at the edge of the Kola Superdeep Borehole and looked down into the darkness that would become humanity's doorway to geological scale consciousness. The real work was about to begin. 3 months after the initial integration protocol was implemented, Dr. Yelena Volkov made her first descent into the underground through the Kola access point. The elevator system constructed by underground civilizations could transport surface individuals to depths that should have been impossible to survive, using pressure and temperature adaptation technologies that had been developed over millennia of geological scale engineering. At 12,262 meters below the surface, Yelena emerged into a vast chamber that challenged every assumption she had ever held about physics, geology, and the nature of space itself. The underground wasn't a series of tunnels or caverns. It was an entire world existing within the geological structure of the Earth. Vast cities stretched across distances that shouldn't have been possible given the surface area above them. Construction projects on scales that dwarfed any surface engineering achievement extended in all directions, supported by gravitational manipulation technologies that made massive structures feasible at crushing depths. But the most striking aspect of the underground was its inhabitants. The 847 integrated civilizations hadn't been absorbed into some homogeneous collective. They maintained their distinct cultural identities while operating as components of a larger geological consciousness. Yelena could see Roman engineers working alongside Chinese mathematicians on structural calculations for continental-scale seismic dampening networks. Egyptian architects collaborated with Soviet metallurgists on thermal regulation systems for volcanic activity management. Medieval European builders shared construction techniques with Mesopotamian irrigation specialists as they designed underground water management systems that spanned continents. All of them moved with the purposeful coordination of individuals who shared access to geological scale awareness while retaining their surface-developed personalities and expertise. Dr. Petrov approached her with the easy familiarity of someone who had been expecting her arrival for 30 years. Dr. Volkov, welcome to the real Earth. What you call the surface world is essentially the roof of our construction project. Yelena stared at the impossibly vast underground civilization stretching beyond the limits of her vision. How is this space possible? The geological structure shouldn't support cavities of this size at this depth. Space operates differently when consciousness operates at geological scales. We don't excavate the underground, we grow it. Consciousness at sufficient scale can manipulate matter at the molecular level, creating spaces that exist in harmony with geological pressures rather than in opposition to them. Dr. Petrov led her through the underground's Central Coordination Center, where representatives from all 847 integrated civilizations participated in planning and implementing planetary maintenance projects. The scale of their operations was staggering. Seismic network management covering 6 continents, thermal regulation systems extending throughout the Earth's mantle, gravitational stabilization matrices that prevented tidal variations from destabilizing the planet's rotation. every major earthquake prevented, every volcanic eruption regulated, every tidal catastrophe avoided, all of it results from underground construction and maintenance projects, Dr. Petrov explained. Surface civilizations exist because the underground makes surface existence stable. Yelena realized that her understanding of Earth's geological systems had been fundamentally incomplete. What surface science described as natural geological processes were actually the results of continuous underground engineering projects designed to maintain planetary stability. Dr. Petrov, I need to ask you something that's been troubling me since the integration began. If the underground is capable of planetary scale engineering, why do you need surface civilizations to join you? Why not simply maintain the planet independently? Dr. Petrov's expression grew serious. Because planetary maintenance is only the first phase of geological scale civilization. The real work, the work that requires continuous expansion of consciousness and engineering capability, is what comes next. He led her to an observation deck overlooking the underground's most ambitious construction project, a massive structural framework that extended far beyond the limits of the underground city, reaching toward depths that exceeded even the geological boundaries of the Earth itself. We're building transportation infrastructure for interplanetary underground networks, Dr. Petrov explained. The 17 other worlds with underground civilizations are coordinating construction of a transit system that operates through planetary cores. When complete, consciousness will be able to travel between underground networks instantly, allowing geological scale cooperation on a galactic level. Yelena stared at the construction project with a mixture of awe and terror. You're building a transportation network through planetary cores. We're building the infrastructure for Type 3 civilization that operates at galactic scales using planetary core transportation and geological scale consciousness. Earth's integration with the underground is humanity's entry point into galactic civilization. And surface civilizations that refuse integration remain bound to single-planet existence until their resources are exhausted and their civilizations collapse. Integration with the underground is the only path to sustainable galactic-scale development. As Yelena absorbed the implications of what she was seeing, she realized that her role as liaison between surface Russia and the underground was more significant than she had initially understood. She wasn't just facilitating technology transfer or cultural exchange, she was helping to prepare humanity for integration with galactic civilization. But the transition came with responsibilities that exceeded anything surface civilization had ever contemplated. Geological scale consciousness meant accepting responsibility for planetary maintenance. Galactic scale civilization meant accepting responsibility for maintaining the stability of multiple worlds. Dr. Petrov, what happens to individual human consciousness during this expansion process? Do we remain recognizably human when operating at geological and galactic scales? Dr. Petrov smiled with the warmth of someone who had wrestled with the same questions for decades. Yelena, look around you. Do I seem like I've lost my humanity? Does Ivan Volinsky, who's been here for 477 years? Does Alexius, the Roman engineer, who joined us in 127 CE? Yelena realized that despite the vast expansion of their consciousness and capabilities, the underground inhabitants she had met retained the personality characteristics, cultural identities, and individual perspectives that had defined them during their surface lives. Expansion doesn't eliminate individual consciousness, it amplifies it. I'm still Mikhail Petrov, Soviet geologist. but I'm also part of a consciousness that can perceive and manipulate geological forces across continents. The individual and the geological exist simultaneously. And when we expand to galactic scales, I'll still be Mikhail Petrov, but I'll also be part of a consciousness that can maintain the stability of multiple worlds and facilitate communication between underground networks across light years of distance. Yelena felt the philosophical weight of the choice facing humanity. Integration with the underground offered unlimited expansion of consciousness and capabilities, but it also meant accepting responsibility for maintenance of planetary and eventually galactic systems. Dr. Petrov, I think I'm ready to begin the consciousness expansion process. I want to understand what it means to operate at geological scales. Dr. Petrov led her to the underground's consciousness expansion facility, where the pressure and electromagnetic conditions necessary for geological scale awareness could be safely achieved. The process is gradual and reversible during the initial phases. You'll experience expanded awareness while retaining the ability to return to surface-scale consciousness. As Yelena prepared for her first experience of geological scale consciousness, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from surface geology to the threshold of galactic civilization. She had come to the Kola Peninsula to investigate seismic anomalies. Instead, she had discovered humanity's next evolutionary phase. The underground was ready for Russian integration. Galactic civilization was ready for Earth's participation. And Dr. Yelena Volkov was ready to discover what human consciousness became when it expanded to encompass the geological processes of entire worlds. The deepest well had become a doorway to the largest possible human future, and humanity was ready to begin the real work of conscious evolution.